Hello everybody, Aimer back, feeling better, not 100%, but certainly much better than I was. And just ready to continue with another installment in the big list. As we approach the top, we're getting up into that B-, almost B range right now. And we're looking at better episodes than we have before. So let's get right to it. Starting with number 75, Season 1, Episode 28, The Psychic. The IMF must get wealthy investor Alex Lowell's shares in an important military contracting company before he can sell them to an unfriendly buyer. The tactics and the trickery used by the IMF are excellent in this one. The plot is somewhat ordinary, though it is effective. Barry Sullivan is Alex Lowell, the villain here, and he doesn't really add any points to the ranking. He's not totally boring, but his delivery and acting are just kind of flat and level that I find him kind of unengaging. That's just my opinion. A lot of the time is spent by Alex trying to unravel what's going on around him, but the IMF is, as usual, able to stay a step ahead of him. This one is better than previous episodes because of Barney's gadgetry. He does some fantastic work with some mirrors. There is a very, very neat card switching arm, which is really the key to the whole mission, and that part of it is really, really well executed. Speaking of well executed, this whole episode and IMF plot is a Kansas City shuffle, and actually a really, really good one, where they make Alex Lowell believe that he's kind of seen through the plan and he's one step ahead of them, but the IMF, of course, is one step ahead of him all the way. Number 74, Season 6, Episode 16, Stone Pillow. The IMF must locate a film that private investigator Edison has hidden as... try that again. Number 74, Season 6, Episode 16, Stone Pillow. The IMF must locate a film that private investigator Larry Edison has hidden as blackmail on mobster Vincent Vocek. This one has some cookie-cutter elements to the story. It has some plot holes. There's not a lot of risk to the mission other than the fact that the target Edison is very street smart. However, as it always turns out, the IMF plan is able to stay one step ahead of he and Vincent Vocek, who are both single-mindedly focused on that blackmail film, which results in some lameness. This one is better than previous ones because it's got good teamwork by all four IMF members in this case. It's also got a good guest cast, including Robert Ellenstein as Vocek, who's always excellent. Bradford Dillman as Larry Edison is also really good, and a great casting decision as in Brooke Mills as Leona Prescott, who plays a key role in the episode as well. Number 73, Season 6, Episode 15, The Bride. The IMF must take down syndicate money launderer Corvin, who just happens to be awaiting his mail-order bride from back home in Ireland. James Gregory as Joe Corvin is fooled very effectively by the team in a classic frame-up, but barely avoids total schmuckery. The IMF is able to predict his moves every step of the way, and it's just a matter of walking him through the steps. The switcheroo they pull at the funeral home with Corvin's bride is quite neat, but that's really the only high point here, I think. This reminds me of several episodes from the second series run, the revival, where it seems like the writers feel they have to make a point of having the villain have a Disney villain death. Meeting his end the way that he dished out punishment, in this case being pushed down an elevator shaft like he did to someone at the beginning of the episode. They seem maybe a little bit too focused on that. Maybe that's just me. This one is better because it is a well-executed story, even though they do give away the ending a little bit in the apartment scene. James Gregory is good, but really I feel that the minor stars, Brad Dexter and Charles Deerkop, are really great in this episode, and I preferred looking at their performances as really enhancing the episode than James Gregory. This is also a great outing for Linda Day George as the mail order bride, and as I mentioned, the sequence at the mortuary is a lot of fun too, where the IMF pull a very neat switcheroo. Number 72, Season 1, Episode 21, Snowball in Hell. The IMF must dispose of a sample of cesium-138, which has been stolen by an infamous jail warden, Gerard Sephra, which can be used to make nukes and make sure its secret is lost. This episode is a great example of something that the producers did a lot in early episodes. Just get a good actor, use a fairly well-designed plot, and just let him go. The IMF gets the Mark Sephra to do most of the work just by setting up a simple, logical, real-world circumstance. His air conditioning goes out and he has to scramble to protect his MacGuffin. Nothing complicated. They just need to anticipate what he'll do and how he'll react. In this regard, unfortunately, it's kind of necessary to say that Sephra is lame and fairly easy to manipulate. But the IMF does earn their win here overall. But it's better because, wow, when you have Ricardo Montalban, that's a whole lot of entertainment. It's not possible for this guy to be in something and not have it be good. So he single-handedly is responsible for this rating right here. Number 71, Season 2, Episode 5, The Slave. The IMF must put a halt to the slave trade in the Near East country of El-Kabar by eliminating its king, Ibn Borka, and his main dealer, Karl de Groot. This one is an entertaining two-parter, which is quite a strange mixed bag of good and not so great. There is a great array of guest stars, but a super kitschy scene with frozen bats, which is weird and borderline disorienting. And in my review, I commented on how egregious and unnecessary really it was. Warren Stevens as de Groot becomes a complete schmuck in the middle of part 2, and the rest of the villains aren't much more formidable at that point after they started out looking fairly capable in part 1. This abrupt shift really drags things down, and it turns the caper into an anvilicious episode about slavery. So the episode doesn't really get up any higher than this. However, I would say that it is better than Snowball in Hell and other episodes I've mentioned, because it is a good IMF plan, it's well executed, and especially, again, Barney's gadgetry is great. The bats notwithstanding, but that's not really his gadgetry. He does a whole lot of very, very fancy things that visually look great. It's hard to understand how he and Rollin were able to maneuver around the entire holy city of El-Kabar so easily and undetected, but whatever. Also, there are some really entertaining scenes between Jim and Musha, played by Sid Haig. Those two always have a lot of fun when they face off. Number 70, Season 3, Episode 25, The Interrogator. Norvan Kruger is an enemy agent who has knowledge of an impending attack on the U.S. in 2 days, and the IMF must find out what is planned and stop it. This one is heavy on the psychology side, where the IMF has to seriously disorient and keenly maneuver their target to get the information they need. It's a bit slow to move forward, in my opinion, at times, and so much of it depends on so many unknowns, including what's going on inside a person's head. And that requires a lot of suspension of disbelief. But under the circumstances, it's a little bit necessary, so it's believable enough. Henry Silva as Kruger is good, but not great. I don't get a great vibe from him in this one. Maybe that's just how he was directed. Hard to say. Gunnar Hellstrom as Spindler, his co-interrogator, so to speak, he's okay, but he's in another tough role to watch after the whole "let me be your Führer" thing in Season 1, and here he's also screaming a lot for the most part, so doesn't get to do a whole lot of character development as far as that goes. However, this one is better than previous episodes because of the quality of the mission. It's a difficult mission. It's definitely the type of mission that you need an elite task force for, and the IMF is really called for in this case. The mission is done with the end in mind and then kind of working backwards, and that's pretty difficult to do. And there's nothing really predictable here in terms of the way that the episode shakes out. Number 69, Season 5, Episode 9, The Amateur. The IMF must exfiltrate components of a new weapon from behind the Iron Curtain, but the mission is complicated by multiple parties on their trail. Anthony Zerb's character in this one, Eric Schilling, he falls on the wrong side of the fine line between genius and lame schmuck in this one, in my opinion. That's really kind of the point of the episode, but still. This episode belongs in this range, I feel, because it's a little bit low on the action side. There's a lot of dialogue and not a lot of action here, and it doesn't really strike the right balance as far as that goes, as far as I'm concerned, especially towards the beginning of the episode. If Eric Schilling were so awesome, or so wannabe awesome, we would know by what he does, and I talked about that at length in the review. He wouldn't have to talk and flap his gums about how great and smart he is. We would know. And as I said, I do know that that is the point of the episode, that he is an amateur, he's in over his head, but I feel beaten over the head with that. We're reminded of that so often by almost every character. Despite the seeming risk to the mission at multiple stages, it doesn't end up being that difficult overall. This one is better, though, than previous episodes because, despite the character, Anthony Zerbe is still a fantastic actor. We also have Ronald Feinberg in this one as the police chief. He is great. This is probably his best role on the show. I often comment about how he's on the show, he's a good presence, but, it seems to be kind of wasted. Not here. There's great teamwork by the IMF, and the final sequence at the airport is absolutely top-notch. I love that last scene. Number 68, Season 6, Episode 1, Blind. The IMF must protect the cover of Agent Henry Matula and have him move up in Boss Lawton's organization. This one is a nice opener for Season 6. It introduces Linda Day George onto the team. It's got a good guest cast, but it's another one where the guest cast is really, really large, and there's a lot of people to keep track of. And the mission here kind of seems to be tailored to the story and not the other way around. It's like they did a story and then they had a mission tape to say, okay, well, here's what we want to get out of the story. That seemed to happen more often than I would like in Season 6 and 7. And the IMF's goal here is somewhat weird and nebulous. It's not like, well, you got to put this guy out of business or whatever. No, you have to protect this guy and make sure he moves up in the organization. I didn't like that. I mentioned that there are a lot of characters to keep track of too, and that is also problematic. The guys at the top that we're supposed to be concerned about as part of the mission, Lawton and Matula, almost seem like afterthoughts in the story in favor of some of the more minor characters. That said, it's better because of those minor characters. Peter Brown as Johnny Brown is really the MVP of this one. He carries the episode almost all the way through. Jason Evers is in this as a guy named Dietrich, who's also part of the organization. He's not directly the team's focus as per the mission, but he turns out to be in the end. And Peter Graves does a great job here as a wayward, blind federal agent where the name of the episode comes from. This is really a fine outing for Peter Graves. Number 67, Season 6, Episode 14, The Connection. The IMF must put a drug ring operation out of business by manipulating manufacturer Reese Dolan to identify his key contacts. Anthony Zerbe is back again, playing a role that fits him better than some of the others he was given in previous years. There's not a lot of action in this one, again in favor of a fair bit of dialogue, but there's also not a lot of dead spots either. The whole team, especially Casey, they get a good mix of suitable roles in this one. There are some fairly glaring plot holes for the sake of keeping the story moving, and this one also has another large cast in terms of guests, and that also does mean a lot of characters to keep track of. The ending is interesting, but a little bit clunky and overbooked. Overall, the episode, though, is fairly entertaining. This one is better because of that good guest cast. It includes Anthony Zerbe. It includes Joe Moross as Clegg, who's always great when he's on the show. It has one of the best wild cards ever, I feel, in Bruce Watson as a guy named Charlie Finch. He seems to be the prime mover of the plot. The main mission seems almost secondary because of his involvement. His presence is really the only difficulty for the IMF, and without that, I think that this episode would have been pretty bad. Number 66, Season 5, Episode 20, Kitara. The IMF must rescue resistance leader John Darcy, aka Kitara, who is being held by the white supremacist governor of his area. This is a super anvilicious episode, but not in a way that detracts from the actual mission. It's a case of some anvils need to be dropped about a terrible apartheid state's repression. There's a lot of innuendo-laced dialogue about race and related issues. Gets a little bit tiring after a while. It's done in an entertaining way. This mission has kind of an old school feel. It would fit right into season 2 or 3. There's not a lot of screen time, though, for Leonard Nimoy in this one. It's late in season 5 when, unfortunately, Nimoy had kind of mentally checked out. Sam Elliott gets a bigger role, which ordinarily I think would have gone to Nimoy under other circumstances. And we do, unfortunately, get a glimpse of the IMF main's tactic right from the beginning in this episode. So that kills the suspense a little bit, but overall the episode does work. This episode is better than the previous ones because it's a good story, as I've mentioned, good teamwork by all members of the IMF, and a fantastic performance by Lawrence Dobkin as the villain in this one. He really kind of runs a full gamut of emotions through this episode, and I think it's a really excellent performance there. Number 65, Season 2, Episode 11, The Council. The IMF must take down Frank Wayne, head of the syndicate, and get his records detailing money transfers to Swiss banks. This is the one that they turned into a movie for international audiences. It covers all of the Mission Impossible bases, so to speak. It's got a cogent plot. It's got a decent guest cast. It has the usual techniques of how the IMF goes about their business. The plot is deliberately slow at times because the story's focus is on fooling a bunch of touchy mobsters and pulling off a switcheroo of Rollin for Frank Wayne. Beyond the slowness of the plot, it's problematic because Paul Stevens, who plays Frank Wayne, is dubbed over by Martin Landau, which is somewhat unsettling. It's really, really obvious and doesn't come across well. There is a degree of difficulty throughout this episode, which is good, and a few high spots here and there, but even the writers admit that this is a one-parter that kind of went long. It's better than previous episodes because, despite the slow pace, the gimmickry is elaborate and deliberate, and it's necessary because of the mobsters' methods and practices. They're not going to leave Frank Wayne alone, so the IMF have to go through a very elaborate process in order to get the mission accomplished. I especially like the realism of Rollin having to learn about Frank Wayne's voice and mannerisms from observation, rather than just kind of having it come automatically. That is actually, that dose of realism is quite refreshing in this one. Number 64, Season 1, Episode 24, The Train. The IMF must prevent the dying Prime Minister Laria of Svardia from appointing his deputy Miloš Pavel from taking power, as Pavel will reverse all of the democratic reforms Laria has made. This plot is a bit slow at times, and it's formulaic in retrospect if you watch it back. But being from season 1, it actually contributes rather than draws from the Mission Impossible formula. It's the first of its kind of fantastic voyage that gets used in a lot of episodes in later seasons. It's put together quite well from a plot standpoint. It somehow avoids being boring, even though there's a lot of time spent in the train yards, hence the name of the episode, where there's not a lot of action. That does take a lot of time, and I don't know, they came close to making me a little bit bored at that point, but they recovered. This is another one where Rollin Hand has to take the role of team leader, and he pulls it off really, really well in this one. This is better than previous episodes I've mentioned mostly because of William Wyndham as Milos Pavel. He's great. He's always great when he's on the show. You can't have a bad episode with that guy. Noah Keane, who plays Androv, his second in command, is also really good as support in this one. He's a frequent guest star in upcoming seasons later in the show. Despite the fact that it doesn't work in the real world, the effect of the IMF, doing the fantastic voyage by simulating a train voyage by, having film outside of a window, visually that does look good and it does contribute to the desired effect of this episode. So I'll give that one a plus here as well, despite the lack of realism there. And I think that that's it for this part of the big list. This is a little bit longer than some of the other videos that I've done, but I do want to get towards the top 50 and from then up to the top 30, where I'm going to have to do things a little bit differently, and you'll kind of see what I have planned for that. Hopefully that's coming sooner than later. Thank you guys as always for watching. Please like this review video. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so you get alerted when the next set of the big list comes out. And please leave your comments about this video and other episodes. Thank you guys again, and I'll see you next time.